Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Audit Advisory Committee meeting of the 21-22 school year. I am, for those of you who may not know me, I'm Emily Bays. I am the president of the school board this year. We are doing it a little differently this year in that we are going to ask for a chair of the committee from the Board of Education. We have 3 board members on the committee this year, Dr. Adam Block, Mr. Adam Smith, and Ms. Julie Epstein. And we have, this is formally an audit advisory committee, and that we have many community members who are also on this committee as well. So before we start, and I'm here to basically start the process. So I would like to ask from the board if there is a nomination for a chair of the committee.
Sure, Emily, I'll nominate Julie Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. Block, are you okay with that nomination?
Yes.
Yes. And does anybody have any objections to this nomination? Mr. Epstein, do you accept the nomination?
I do. Thank you.
Okay, so if there aren't any objections, we will go ahead. And Ms. Epstein, you are formally the chair of the committee. And I now turn it all over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Bays. Thank you, Mr. Smith and Dr. Block. Really appreciate it. And welcome to our audit committee meeting. To kick off the season, we have a lot of fresh new faces, and I think it would behoove us all to introduce who we are before we get into the actual business of the meeting, since this is our first meeting. As you heard, I'm Julie Epstein. I'm one of the Board of Education members, and we will just go around our squares to introduce who else is here. I will start with the other board members, Dr. Block.
Hi, Madam Block.
And Mr. Smith.
Hi, I'm Adam Smith. I'm one of the new trustees this year.
Wonderful, thank you. And now we'll go to the community members. Mr. Kleinman. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, Bob Kleinman, longtime community member of this committee. 2 daughters graduated through the system a long time ago, and next year I will have a grandson entering kindergarten.
Congratulations, wonderful, happy to have you, thank you. Mr. Shanahan.
Hi, I'm Jim Shanahan. I've been on the board for the advisory committee for over 10 years with Bob. 2 children graduated from the system, and I have a 3rd one that's in Schreiber currently.
Wonderful, thank you. You are seasoned members, then you're going to help us out here. And Mr. Andrew, I should have had Emily stay on and give me a prompt on your last name. Nikos, can you tell me your last name? I'm sorry. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Andreadis.
Andreadis. Thank you, Mr. Andreadis. Yes.
I'm Nikos Andreadis. I've been a resident of the town for 24 years. I have 2 children, both of whom have graduated from the district.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We're happy to have you. And Mr. Marcellus, did I get your last name correct?
Mark, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Spacebar wasn't working. Hi, I'm Mark Marcellus. I was actually on the school board when the audit committee was created by state mandate. And when I left the board, I did continue to serve on the audit committee. And I also have 2 children who graduated the district, but they live far away, so no grandchildren coming.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And I think, those are all of our community members representing, and the rest are our auditors. Kathleen, would you like to go around and have the auditors introduce themselves?
Sure, thank you. I would like to thank Nicole and Tricia very much for their work. There are external auditors. They worked on the financials with us. And then we also have Darren and Dimitri. They did our internal audits. So Tricia and Nicole, would you like to introduce yourselves first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tricia Lucas. As Kathy just mentioned, Nicole and I are with D'Arcangelo and Company. We are your external auditors, and I was the partner in charge of your engagement this year.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Chubbuck. As Tricia mentioned, I'm with D'Angelo and Company, and I was the manager in charge of your engagement this year.
Darren.
Hi, everybody. Darren Acabelli, Naraki Smith, partner in charge of your internal audit function. And good to see everybody.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dimitri Vantilescas. I'm the director of the internal audit group at Naraki Smith. We're working with, Port Washington, on the internal audit, assessments. And here's also Aksa. Aksa is our senior associate. She's been working with the most recent risk assessment update.
Thank you. And Julie, we also have Donna Viola. She's our new district treasurer. And we also have Jessica Mack. She's the business administrator.
And we can't forget Ruth Smith.
Yes, sorry.
Taking our minutes, and Dr. Hines, correct? Excellent. Thank you. And Ms. O'Hara, thank you for also joining us as our administrative liaison to this committee. So this is wonderful. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. We have a very lengthy meeting today, and we want to make sure we get to everything. Most of you should have already received the agenda. I just want to put it up there for everyone to look at. I actually moved things around, but I think we're going to move them back to the original agenda. So we did our nomination election. We'll go into our internal audit report, our external audit report, and then we'll finalize with our meeting dates, responsibilities, and priorities based on those reports, and go from there from discussion so that we can make a recommendation to the board or any recommendations that we may have to the board. With that, I'm actually going to turn the meeting over. Darren, are you going to be presenting on behalf of the internal audits?
Sure, I'll do that.
So do you need to share your screen?
I do. We have, I believe you all have a copy of the actual risk assessment itself. We do have a 2-page executive summary that we can use to facilitate discussions and then dig into the report if there's specific questions on any particular pages. So I'll share my screen. Actually, Dimitri, can you share your screen on that?
Yes, I can. I'll do it right now.
Yeah, sorry, I think I had a prior version of it up and ready. So. Okay. So each year, for those of you who are familiar with the risk assessment process, it's an annually required update to the risk assessment. So each year one has to be completed, and the resulting recommendations require a corrective action plan, just like your external audit recommendations in the past. So our report this year is as of June 2021. The objective is to assess low, moderate, and high risk areas. And the outgrowth of the risk assessment is to create an internal audit plan for this current fiscal year. You can see in the business process categories what we're referring to there. If you skim through the report, we have a table that does all our risk ratings. I think it's on pages 4 and 5, or 5 and 6. And 7, because it keeps growing each year. We have 21 risk areas that we look at as business process categories. And within those 21 areas, you see there are multiple line items of business functions, process functions, I should say, that we assess by way of interviews, prior corrective action reports, prior audit reports, document review, which Dimitri will talk about shortly. But over the life of the internal audit function, and someone referenced it earlier, as we enter the 13 years or so as a mandate of the internal audit function, the audit universe has grown. I believe, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, there might have been 10, 11, 12 areas. And as the environment keeps changing, as we all learn something new from a risk management perspective, we're adding these areas to our risk assessment. So those in recent years, those areas have included student data management, that is fairly new, probably in the past 3 or 4 years, safety and security, cybersecurity, which we're going to talk about probably at a little bit more in depth. And we just recently added insurance and risk management. So, your internal audit function is really a risk management function, consultative in nature, to confirm that processes are in place, controls are in place, and where controls can be improved, we work on how to mitigate any risk and do the best we can with the resources that are available through the district. So Dimitri will walk through the process of how we did it and the results. And certainly you don't need to hold back any questions. If you have a specific report question, just fire away at any given time.
Okay, so our risk assessment, as Darren mentioned, covers a lot of areas, 21 areas. So for us to do the risk assessment, we had to meet with key personnel, and we have showing you here a sample of the people that we met, from the superintendent of schools, the superintendent for business, all the way down to senior account clerks. And it's important to meet with them to understand their roles, their duties, and their processes in their departments of how controls and the operations work. We also circulate a document request during our risk assessment, and we ask for information from each of these departments in each of these areas. And here we have also given you a snapshot of the information that we review, such as the org charts, or prior audit reports, or payroll overtime reports. We look at the financial statements, we look at the bank recs, the treasurer's reports, and any other purchasing or RP and bid schedules. We do look at these records. It's important to analyze them, and from them, we select a sample where we do testing of the transactions. And then, as part of our risk assessments, once we do these interviews, understand the controls, review the records, analyze them, and do testing, we have certain scoring variables that we consider to assess the effectiveness of the internal controls. So, as you can see here from the bottom of the page, we look at the operations to see whether there have been any changes from one year to the next. We'll look at the transactions, how voluminous or if there's any complexity to them. We want to make sure that there is oversight from management, from the Board of Ed and the Audit Committee. We consider any external variables like compliance with regulations, the systems, how efficient they have been utilized and who has access to them. We assess the staffing, controls, the segregation of duties and checks and balances, but also how experienced and whether the staffing needs more additional training. And we also look at the results from the prior audits, from the external audit reports or even our own internal reports, and we want to assess the district's implementation status of these recommendations. What we also do, since we still live in a pandemic era, we take into account how COVID has impacted the district's internal controls. So as an example, like we, in each of these 21 areas, we ask, general questions, whether COVID had impacted, their expenses, their budgets, or has any changes happened in their staff and how did that affect their checks and balances, the segregation of duties. So we want to see these areas, we want to ask these questions overall to understand whether the risk, tolerance has, changed, because of COVID. In the next page of our executive summary, we're showing you the results of our risk assessment update. So in the first table, we're showing you as Darren mentioned before, like we have 21 areas, but each one of them has sub-processes. And, total, we look at 92 business processes. So we have a 2-year trend here summary of the risk ratings from 1920 to 2021. So we have high, moderate, low risk ratings. Consistently, we see that the district has a positive risk profile. We see 0 high risk ratings from one year to the next, and almost all of the risk ratings are in the low risk area. It was 92 in 1920, 91 in 2021. We just have one moderate rating, and we can talk about that a little bit further down for the year ending 2021. During our risk assessment, we also look at our prior year risk assessment recommendations. We had 2 in the report, and one of them has been completed and one of them is in process. The one that's complete pertains to the Pupil Personnel Department, where we recommended and has been implemented to maintain social history updates and student observations to be maintained in the students' files. And the one in process pertains to overall the district's workflow process, where we recommend some of these transactions that are requested and approved manually, the district to implement an automated an electronic workflow process. We also, following this page, we're showing you the summary of our risk ratings and recommendations as of June 2021. So here you can see all the 21 business processes, and also the risk ratings for each of the sub-processes. So as we said, we had covered 92 areas. So in the first column, low risk ratings, you see all the 91. Moderate ratings, you'll see 1 in insurance risk management, and again, 0 high risk ratings. We do have 2 recommendations in our June 2021 risk assessment update. One is in the capital projects pertaining to our cycle review in that area, and we recommend the district and the department to develop documented procedures on the capital project planning, the funding, the contract awarding, and the closeout procedures. In our cycle audit report, we have also attached narratives that describe the procedures as we have observed, and we recommend the district to utilize these narratives as part of the procedural manual. The second recommendation pertains to insurance risk management, where we are recommending the district to review its cybersecurity policy and increase its coverage, as we have experienced from other clients. When a cyber incident happens, you need enough coverage to cover not only your litigation costs, but also your forensic and investigative costs. So as an outgrowth of our risk assessment, as Darren mentioned.
Dimitri?
Yes.
I don't know if we want to wait till you finish the summary, but I do want to tread lightly into the weeds on a couple of the cybersecurity issues. Do we want to wait till the end, or do we want to go into that now?
I just have one little comment here, and we can finish the executive summary, then we can talk about more cybersecurity, which actually it leads to it, because we did all this work, we did the risk assessment, and now we're about to make a plan of what we should spend our time during the fiscal year 21-22. So for your consideration, or the audit committee's consideration, we have a selection of one cycle, whether we can work on cybersecurity or human resources. So cybersecurity, both areas actually are hot topic areas for a lot of school district clients. In the cybersecurity area, we are interested, our audit program includes a review of the general controls, the asset security, vulnerability assessments, and the district's process on, incident responses.
Okay, so I'd like to drill down into that a bit now, but from what you're saying, it sounds like it's best you finish this up and then we can do that.
Sure, we can do this right now.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'd like to start with one question that I'm a little confused by on the report. If you go to page 4 of the full report under cybersecurity, you have key control, other testing, and you're referencing key categories. And of course, my screen goes blank when I'm talking about this, but you reference key categories on the following pages, okay?
Yep.
Which means that you're talking about cycle testing for those categories, I think. But when you go to the grid, it's shown with an X, and I'm not sure what the difference and whether you're talking about doing what you're
Yes.
talking about doing this year.
Sure. So what I have on the screen is our internal audit plan, proposed internal audit plan for the fiscal year 21-22. So as a cycle review, we recommend the audit committee to consider one of the two cybersecurity human resources. Now, in the next part of the table, there's additional audit services that we provide to the district. So one of those is key control testing, identified as with a T in the following pages. We also look at the external audit corrective action plan. We provide a mid-year status report. We will follow up on the prior year capital project cycle recommendations, and we will do another annual update of the risk assessment.
Well, okay, yeah, I get that, but you're referencing that that's going to be a T category on the grid, but it's showing as an X. And
Yeah,
I'm wondering.
So I'm going to the next page.
And if you go down to item 16 on the grid.
Yeah, 1 second, just want to move something here. So here in the risk rating internal audit plan legend up here, if you see something in an X, that means it's our proposed cycle review. If you see something in a T, it's our proposed key control testing. Now the other, and if you go down.
But on top, you're saying that the cybersecurity should be proposed key control testing, but here you're showing it as proposed business cycle review. So which are you proposing?
It is, I think there's some confusion. We're proposing it as a full cycle of cybersecurity, our complete audit scope of our cycle review. The key control testing T is really a limited scope review, very detailed testing just to that specific line item, that specific key control. And that report is just, we just basically gather documents, do test work as opposed to a full cycle of interviews, testing every process in the control structure for that cycle, and then writing a pretty extensive report with narratives and key controls identified within. So
okay, that sounds great then. And then I guess the other thing I would ask is, where is your area of coverage here, and where do you leave off in terms of what do you review and what don't you? And I'm going to give one example here that just in the process of getting in here, and I know everybody was scrambling, and I'm not blaming anybody because it's the software you're talking about. But basically, the means we were used to get to board docs where passwords were shared and there was no third-party authentication, and it was suggested but not required by the software that we change our passwords once we get in. I mean, that right there would, as an IT person, would be a very major key control flaw. So I'm just wondering, is that the kind of thing you'd look at? You get that to that level, or is that something that you'd need more of an IT specialist to look at?
So Mark, when we do our cybersecurity audits, we do look at the area of asset security, which pertains how the districts, what are the district's processes, internal controls surrounding, making the network secure. And we do include a review of how the district goes about password complexity, password frequencies, and who has passwords. And then when we talk about third-party authentication, the multi-factor authentication is where we review whether the district has implemented multi-factor authentication to users that access the district on a remote basis, but also for users that have administrative privileges.
Okay, and what about software that the district uses, with the example of board docs being one? I mean, do you look at the software to make sure that they're controlled and that they have two-factor authentication and so on?
So if for the cybersecurity, we do focus on the software that host or transmit personal identifiable information. And we do want to see in those applications what the security controls are for them. Again, not only just the password requirements, but if those sensitive applications have multi-factor authentication as well. So like, the district has student data management systems, has, applications for special education programs like the IEPs. Those contain student information, and those security controls should be reviewed.
Okay, thank you.
But I do want to show you a little bit more down of the report where.
Dimitri, can I just stop you for a second? Dr. Block has a question also.
Of course, sorry.
So my question is on insurance as well. First, on the cybersecurity piece, which I actually appreciate your recommendation that says that our coverage is currently limited to $250,000. I'd love to know, what coverage level you think is the right coverage level, and in particular, given the changes that we became a one-to-one system in the last, basically, starting last fall.
So that's a great question. And we do believe that $250,000 is low. I do know for a fact that the business office, the district, is in the process of reviewing the cybersecurity coverage as we speak. Our experience with school districts for cybersecurity insurance is, with NYSER, that they offer $1 million coverage. At the same time, though, I've seen other districts do supplemental cyber coverages that goes up to $2 million and $3 million.
So if I could just interrupt, as of July 6th, I believe, we have $3 million worth of coverage, and it covers various different aspects of the cybersecurity.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to ask one more question on insurance, which is not related to cybersecurity. But I think that is, well, it sounds like I voted for it. So, so that's, I definitely support the increase. The other question is, I noticed that there was not any other discussion of insurance, but we had Hurricane Ida, and it caused millions of dollars worth of damage to our school district, and we have a cap of flood insurance at $1 million. And so I'd like to know just where in the report or how, auditing reflects the fact that we had far more damage to the school district than our current insurance maximums would insure us for.
So in that particular instance, so what we're assessing is that there's a process in place to review your policies with your carriers and look at appropriate coverages. In this case, we did not assess whether you had enough coverage for the damage that took place. I'm assuming you had someone from the carrier come out and do a damage assessment, or another third party, or possibly a public adjuster. I'm not quite sure what happened in managing that, but we do want to make sure that each year your carriers are doing their own sensitivity or risk assessment to make sure that you have enough coverage from a compliance standpoint and potential damages. So that level of expertise, we leave to your carrier, but we want to make sure that process happens. In the case with cybersecurity, we're able to give you coverage information, what we see with other clients. Dimitri is a certified cybersecurity auditor. He spearheads all our, areas, all our cybersecurity audits. which I just want to digress 1 second. The other part of your cybersecurity policy coverage is to make sure that you have the practices and policies in place, because if you don't, your carriers might not cover that. Your policies require you to have practices in place, best practices. So that's just something else to think about. It's not just one thing to have the policy paid for and have the $3 million, but you have to also be able to prove you've got the policy compliance requirements from a controls standpoint. For property damage, if you are in excess of that, that really comes from the expertise of those who can assess what the damages were across the board. Incidentally, we have done property casualty, business interruption, loss calculations for clients and for insurance companies. But that's certainly after the fact, gathering the documents, seeing what the costs were to mitigate or remediate, a mold issue or remediate a construction issue or flooding, and compiling all the data to show that you exceeded your coverage amount, you should be paid in full. Which items are extra expense items that are being debated by carriers to go back and forth. So long story short is we're assessing that the processes are in place to assess the damage number. We didn't do a tick and tie exercise to see if you exceeded your coverage levels within your property and casualty coverage.
One thing that I do at work every year is I asked our insurance broker to do a full benchmarking of our policies. Organizations change, they grow, and are we adequately covered, and to review the terms and conditions. That's something we just do each year. And then I don't know how this applies to a school district. And I don't know if it's a question for the internal audit or the external audit, but a lot of audit committees are being migrated to retitled to audit and risk committees. So obviously the discussion just now is on cyber risk and insurance risk. And in a public school environment, is it the obligation of the audit advisory committee to address all the risk, or is the risk role really at the board level, or is it at both? Just how is it migrated in a school environment?
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, Kathy O'Hara and I have had several conversations about this, because we do want to look at this in the Budget and Facilities Committee. And Kathy has been speaking to NYSER and also a private agency that we're talking to, Adam. So we should have, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, we should be at some point in the near future hearing from them in terms of overall, whether or not we're properly insured.
Yes, that is correct. And also in relation to Hurricane Ida, we have a third-party engineer that we're hiring to actually validate the cost that Belfour is setting, that this was the total amount of damage. So, and also going through FEMA, taking those steps, you need that third-party review by an engineer.
And Jim,
Thank you, everybody.
And Jim, I think also to your question, the follow-up of your question is to what extent is this audit committee responsible for the risk assessment, correct? And making a recommendation to the board. And while I can delve deeper into it to see, I do think that we can have those conversations. And as those risk assessments are coming up in working with our internal auditors and our external auditors, that we as a committee are required to make those recommendations to the board if we see we need more assessment because we have some vulnerabilities on the risk side as well. So that is within our purview.
So Jim, your comment, like, yeah, it is transitioning to audit and risk advisory, in many industries, and we even discussed it internally at my firm. Do we rename our division because that's kind of it's an audit and risk advisory, it's heading in that direction. You're in tune to that. We opted at this point to stick with internal audit because that's more of a household name for many of our clients. They're not really in the weeds of those types of movement within the industry, but we've always looked at the function as risk management, risk advisory. So if something came to your attention or the audit committee's attention mid-year, it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to reach out to us and ask us to dig deeper into a certain area to assess, to assist with those risks. And as we're speaking about cybersecurity, that's happening across the board where we're doing a cybersecurity audit, but many districts are taking the next step to do, a gap analysis that is related to the cybersecurity audit, but more so getting in compliance with the requirements under Ed Law 2D to assess your compliance with the NIST framework, for your cybersecurity. So yeah, the audit committee has a lot to talk about. You can manage risk from insurance policies to cybersecurity to, many clients ask us to match up their active employee database to their swipe badge database for security and make sure we don't have badges, with prior employees or, former employees or people who don't need access to certain buildings. And we do that kind of risk management database work for them as well. So as items come to your attention, we can talk about it and how do we squeeze it into our internal audit plan as it exists now under the contract. We can swap things out, or, is it something that rises to the occasion that, the board agrees to spend a couple of extra dollars above our contracts to get this work done. We can work it out.
Sorry,
anyway.
Darren, sorry to interrupt you. Can you talk about that a little bit more in terms of like the NIST framework gap analysis? I'm a little confused as to what we have in our contract and what would be additional.
Yeah.
Because based on the previous question to what Mark was asking it, I would have thought you were doing that.
So that is really fairly new, that assessment, probably within the last less than a year, Dimitri. To come out and do that.
We've been doing this for about a decade in the private sector.
The requirement for a school district to do a gap analysis, that's within the last year. So where the district stands in the NIST framework has not been fully assessed. I mean, Dimitri can speak more to it. How many points of assessment are there, Dimitri? 160?
Yeah, so there's the CIS, where works, for the NIST framework and has identified 18 controls, and each one of them has like sub safeguards, 153 in total. And the NIST gap analysis is something that school districts have started to do in order to show that they're in compliance with the Ed Law Part 2D. Our cybersecurity audit is it's an internal audit compliance requirement. So, but our cybersecurity audit covers parts of the NIST gap analysis. Approximately it's like 60 to 65%. There's additional work that has to be done in order to do like the full 100% or the extra 35% and complete the compliance regarding the NIST framework and the Ed Law Part 2D.
So are you saying that I'm not familiar with that Part 2D that you're talking about? Are we legally required to be to have gone through the NIST framework audit and be in compliance, or is it kind of a best practice?
The Ed Law Part 2D, it's an education law, and we have to be in compliance. Ed Law in generally, Part 2D pertains to the data security of student, personal information, and teachers, and it has other requirements such as not only on the data security but also on the third-party management, the privacy, Bill of Rights, and also the ways that the district has to respond in any cybersecurity incidents, and also address complaints from the parents if those arise. The Ed Law Part 2D, the detail of the law pertains of the school districts to be in compliance with the NIST framework. So to be in compliance with the NIST framework, we have to follow all the NIST framework guidance. And in order to analyze where we are and where we need to be, we have to do that NIST gap analysis. And with that gap analysis, we'll identify areas where we need to improve, and we'll also identify what tier we are in. We could be, school districts right now, they're in the first tier that, they're implementing the ed law or they're implementing the NIST framework, and they move on to tier 2, 3, and 4 as, we're getting more mature in the cybersecurity posture.
So it sounds like we have to do it, not if we choose to do it. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is accurate. We have to do it. And quite honestly, a lot of school districts have started doing it. And we are recommending, Port Washington to do it as well. Because in cybersecurity world, it's about when this will happen. And if it happens to us, how ready are we to respond to it or, recover and minimize our business continuity, downtime.
And Adam, I just want to add, just for your edification, the Education Law 2D, the effects that Dimitri is referencing also on data and privacy security. Those laws, I believe, went into effect July 2019, somewhere in that time period, and has these different requirements of which the school district has been looking at and has been doing over the course. Just as Dimitri explained, each school district is taking on different tier levels with this implementation as the proposed regulations came out. I don't know where we stand currently, right? So that would be something that we could look at as an action.
So that's kind of that's the critical question, I guess, is where we stand currently.
Yes, it would be a great priority for us to have in assessing this as well.
So where would that be, Julie? In which committee or which staff department? Like how do we follow up on that?
My feeling is that can be a priority, especially if this committee wants to recommend looking at cybersecurity. Then the recommendation that comes out of this committee would to recommend and see what tier we're at, where we are in the process of implementing it and overseeing it, and ask that the board, if the board is in agreement, then they would give that directed to the administration. I know that there was a policy discussion about it and the policy was implemented, but again, the analysis and audit, I don't know how far that has gone.
Okay. I would raise a question as to whether 100% of the cybersecurity issues can be covered in a 2-year cycle. Is that a reasonable goal rather than trying to do everything in the current year?
That's a fair and great question, Robert. From our experience, the cybersecurity audits have been lengthy as we cover a lot of areas, and we do spend a lot of time with the IT department and reviewing the information from the district's network. We do, though, want to be efficient and manage it and be done, within a year. So it may, though, trickle in the following year as well. But we have an internal audit compliance, right? So the internal audit compliance is to have one risk assessment and one cycle review to be done. So to be in compliance with the internal audit function, we can certainly do everything in 1 year. To reach the goal of assessing 100%, and meaning like the NIST gap analysis and then assessing the NIST framework compliance, that could trickle to the following year, but that will be another compliance requirement, the NIST framework compliance requirement, which there's no deadline to that. So we can certainly spend more time and, get a better understanding and give, the adequate recommendations for the districts to assess what tier we are in and what tier we need to be in.
So Dimitri, then for that standpoint, if we wanted to go forward with the cybersecurity assessment, right, and you're taking the audit through the process for this next year, would you concurrently do that NIST assessment and gap analysis, or would you is that something you can currently do and it just potentially extends into a second year? What's the timeline of how that works?
Yeah, so we can certainly do it concurrently, okay? And we can, while we're doing both, we would be conscious of, making sure that we meet both compliance requirements, at different times. So if we're successful and we can do both by June 30th, 2022, we will have information for both. But at the least, we will meet the internal audit compliance.
So and just to be transparent about everything, so from a budgetary standpoint, the items that we identified as Ts, the key control testing in various areas, if the committee wished, we can table those and put that time and effort back into the component of the NIST, the gap analysis. And then if we crossed over into the following year, all the work would still be covered under our internal audit contract, right? So there wouldn't be anything extra out of pocket. We can sketch out what all that would look like and send it to Kathleen and share it with you. Just because you're in Nassau County, what Nassau does have is through BOCES is they have several firms, I think 4 or 5 firms that are offering the gap, cyber security firms that are offering the gap analysis to be conducted through BOCES. Those fees, from what I understand, I haven't seen them, but I think those fees are running, 35 to 40 grand to get the whole thing done. We work with another cybersecurity expert. We've done these for other districts. I guess what's happening is we're doing the cybersecurity audit. We're 65% of the way there, which gets you in compliance with the internal audit function. The balance of the 35, 40% is something we're finishing for some districts. Some, the arrangement need to pay a couple extra dollars because the contract was had a different variables to the budgeting, and some they fit into it because it extended into the following year. So we can estimate that for you, but you also do have, the BOCES contract to see what firms are doing it, what you would recover on reimbursement from that. But I think those fees are running somewhere around $40,000 to get it done. So you obviously see different price points when you looked at BOCES. We see it as efficient if we're doing it to get you in compliance with the internal audit function, and then as a couple of dollar potential outlay that's well below the $40,000 to complete the gap analysis. So it does get a little convoluted and confusing, but you're trying to spend the dollars in the best way you can, and that's the decision by the committee. So we just want to let you know that that's what we're seeing in Nassau County. We have Nassau schools that have asked us to continue and complete it, made more sense for their budget, and some that went to BOCES.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Darren. Can I pause, since you just actually made a proposal or a recommendation to the committee? Can I get a sense of the committee after this? I guess first I should ask, do we have any other questions or any more to discuss related to cybersecurity and what we've been outlining right now? Is there more explanation that needs to be given, or any other questions by committee members? We're all good from that sense. And then just to stay consistent and not forget where we are, the recommendation is, I hear it, or what is coming out of this discussion is, if it's a priority or a recommendation that this committee wants to bring to this board about doing a cybersecurity audit. And then the second part of it would be going as far as doing that NIST assessment gap analysis, with the understanding that there would be an additional expense in whether we want to pursue looking at a BOCES aidable firm, or incorporating it into this firm's quote as well for moving forward. Do I have a sense of any of the other committee members as to how they feel we should proceed, or if this is not an area that you want to even proceed in at all?
Julie, how are you asking for the feedback?
I guess I should just go around the committee. So, oh, Mr. Marcellus, you've raised your hand. Thank you.
Sure, and you're going around the committee's fine, but yes, I fully support that. I think the recommendation should be that, because we're behind here, and I think the recommendation should be that full resources go in. I think the execution of, whether you go to BOCES or how you do it, probably is a board level and administration level matter, but I absolutely think that you should be moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Smith.
I'll second Mark. I think that, doing the full NIST gap analysis is kind of like considered like a minimum best practice. And
I'm going to tell you your microphone is having a problem, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I'm not at my normal desk today, so it's tough. But yeah, I would fully push to do that. I think it's like I said, kind of a minimum best practice to be doing a NIST gap analysis in private and public sector. So I agree with Mark.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I guess I'll ask then for the rest of the committee, I can go around, or if anyone has an objection, we have 2 committee members. I'll include myself in there. I think this is the right direction for us to go. Are there any committee members that feel this is not the direction or recommendation that we should bring to the board? All right.
I just want to clarify, is the district will research, the 2 alternatives, one using the Rocky Smith and one using BOCES. And yes. I guess whether it's done in 1 year or 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So then somebody will get back to us.
Yes, they will get back to us, right?
I think that's fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, anyone else on this matter? Okay, excellent. Look at that, we have our first recommendation going to the board. How exciting. Wonderful. And I'm sorry, I know that discussion was lengthy on the cybersecurity front. Darren and Demetrius, I don't know if you want to take us further in any other aspects.
Oh, we're good. We'll provide Kathleen with information on our end so you can make that assessment which direction to go.
Thank you.
And we'll work with her office in communication with everyone here on the board to see what our next steps are. So we're fine.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. We appreciate that thorough assessment as well, and explanation and answering our questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think from that standpoint, it concludes our internal audit review process. And I think now we're going to move over to Tricia and team to move into our external audit.
Okay, thank you. I will be sharing my screen. Do I have those rights?
Yes, you should have those rights.
Okay.
Let me know if it gives you a problem.
Can everybody see that? Okay, good. Thank you. So Nicole and I will be reviewing your external audit report for the year ended June 30th of 2021. Julie, I know in our conversation prior to this meeting, you said you had put aside an hour and a half for this meeting. And are we trying to be out of here by 10:30?
I know you said you probably needed, 45 minutes to an hour. I would say we started a little late anyway. So if you still need maybe 45 minutes, we can probably go past that. I don't know, do any of the administrators have a conflict with going past the 10:30 time period, or any of our committee members? I'm not seeing anyone. So yeah, I think you can take the time that you need, Trish.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick the pace up a little bit, but I just want to make sure I got everybody out on time if there were some additional conflicts. So once again, Nicole and I will be reviewing your external audit report. I do want to say up front that there was a new standard that was effective for the current year. GASB 84 was effective and implemented in your current year financial statements. And as we go through the statements, it doesn't look like a lot of changes from GASB 84, but It really was a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm sure your management team and administrators will agree with me that GASB 84 really took some time and energy into figuring out which accounts to classify as fiduciary and which ones to bring in under the governmental funds. So we'll be looking at that as we go through these financial statements. In addition to the district's financial statements, we performed a single audit as well because the district spent in excess of $750,000 of federal funds. And we also audited the extracurricular funds. So we'll be going over all of those pieces. Pages 1 and 2 of the report are the independent auditor's report. These financial statements are the responsibility of management. Our responsibility was to express opinions on these financial statements. And we did perform our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States and government auditing standards. This paragraph here is your opinions paragraph. You did receive an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, and it is the highest level of opinion that you can receive, and it is what you're accustomed to receiving. So another nice clean audit this year. This paragraph here at the bottom, new accounting standard, this is a new paragraph in the opinion report, once again disclosing that you did implement GASB 84, and it did need, your statements did need to be not restated, but there was a cumulative effect that had to be included to implement GASB 84. The next page, all of the required supplementary information and other information, whether it was required by the state of New York or GASB, is included in these financial statements along with your schedule of federal expenditures. And then this last paragraph is the other reporting required by government auditing standards. There is a government auditing standards report that we'll be looking at in a moment. The next page starts the MD&A. The MD&A is the management discussion and analysis, and it gives you an overview of your district-wide financial statements. The district-wide financial statements take all of your governmental funds, including your general, school lunch, special aid, capital, your new miscellaneous special revenue fund, and your debt service fund. It consolidates them into one column, and it also includes all of your long-term debt and your fixed assets. So this column here is your 2021 column, your 2020, and then we have an increase, decrease, and then a percentage change column as well. Your total assets at the end of the year were $171 million as compared to $166 million in the previous year. So there was an increase of about $4.5 million. Your current and other assets mostly include your cash and your accounts receivable. In addition, last year, your proportionate share of the TRS pension plan was in an asset position, and that was approximately $10 million last year. GASB 68 required you to put on your proportionate share of the pension plans that you participate in, which are TRS and ERS, onto the financial statements. So that was new a few years back. And last year, the TRS pension plan was slightly overfunded, and it did result in an asset on your books of about $10 million. This year, it's slightly underfunded, so there is a liability now. So while that TRS asset did flip down to a liability, your cash increased from year to year in your funds, approximately 11 million, resulting in an increase of 1.2 million in your current and other assets. Your capital assets increased about 3.2 million. You did have additions of about $6 million. Most of that is still in your construction in progress, and that was offset by depreciation expense of about 2.5 million. The next category down is your deferred outflows of resources, and you'll notice down here your deferred inflows of resources. These deferred outflows and inflows of resources are reported to us by actuaries. These are the result of GASB 75, which is your OPEB GASB, resulting in you putting on the liability for the health insurance that you offer to your retirees upon retirement. And then the GASB 68, which are the ERS and TRS liabilities for your proportionate share of those plans. The actuaries use these deferred inflows and outflows to even out the impact on your revenues and expenses on a year-to-year basis. So they'll flow things through these deferred inflows and outflows and then amortize them over a 5-year, over 5 years, again, to just even out the impact on your income statement. The actuary for your OPEB liability is someone that you contract independently within the school district. The actuaries for the ERS and TRS plans are contracted within the pension plan audits. So those two are external, and then the one is contracted independently through the district itself. Your long-term liabilities were $456 million, an increase of about $50 million from the previous year. Your OPEB liability actually increased about $55 million. And we'll look at the change in your OPEB liability in a moment in the notes to the financial statements. And then your bonds decreased about $5 million just through your annual payments that were being made. There was no new debt issued in the current year. Your current and other liabilities was $75 million. You will notice about a $14 million increase there. Your current and other liabilities mostly consist of your accounts payable, your accrued liabilities, the amounts that you owe to the ERS and TRS plans, but also in the current year, you had an increase in your ban. Your bans are about $54 million at this point in time, and that's an increase of about $14 million over the previous year. You are banning for your current capital projects until the projects are near completion, and then eventually you will bond for those projects. Your net position down here at the bottom is actually in a deficit position of $271 million. There are 3 components: your net investment in capital assets of almost $57 million. That is your fixed assets net of any related debt and depreciation expense. You have your restricted amounts of $11.5 million. Those are all of your reserves and your restricted net fund balance in the respective funds. We'll look at that detail in a moment as well. And then you do have an unrestricted deficit of $339 million. Keep in mind that your OPEB liability is $423 million. So this deficit is a direct result of that liability that is required to be on your books for those other post-employment benefits. The next section we're going to look at is, once again, district-wide revenues and expenses. On a district-wide basis, you did have $167 million in revenues, $202 million in expenses, and therefore you did have a change in net position of a decrease of $34 million. You will notice your revenues increased approximately $2.4 million from the previous year. Most of your revenues come from your property taxes and STAR of almost $150 million. And then you do have your operating grants in your state and federal sources. The largest increase in those categories was your property taxes and STAR of about 2.3% or $3.3 million. You will notice a couple larger variances here in your program, your charges for services, and then your operating grants. Keep in mind, with COVID last year, your charges for services decreased pretty significantly, mostly due to your lunch program, where the kids did not have to pay for lunches. You did get the grants in to offset those charges, and that is included here in those operating grants. Your state and federal sources decreased almost $1 million. Most of that was the result of a decrease in state aid. Then you have your expenses of $202 million. That was up $13 million from the previous year. Most of this increase is the result of the increase of the allocation of your OPEB benefits and the pension that, once again, you're required to have on your books for GASB 68. Your pension allocation increased about $8.8 million, and that pension allocation increased about $1.4 million. In addition, you did have just increased expenditures. A lot of it was salaries and benefits due to your contractual obligations. And then there were some additional expenses, which we'll look at when we look at the fund statements in a moment. The next page I'd like to take a look at is this analysis of your fund balances by fund. So this is a little bit more of what you're accustomed to seeing throughout the year. So this breaks it out into the general fund, school lunch, the miscellaneous special revenue fund, which once again is a new fund as a result of GASB 68, your debt service fund, and your capital projects fund. You will notice here your general fund, you had $19.2 million in fund balance at the end of the year, which is an increase of $736,000. Of that, almost $2 million was non-spendable, which is consists of your prepaid expenditures, that is your prepaid insurance. And then you had $8.2 million in your restricted amounts. You had an unemployment insurance reserve, your ERS reserve. That ERS reserve is about 2.5 years worth of expense. You had your TRS reserve of about 1.7 million. That is a newer reserve that allows you to put in 2% of the TRS salaries over a 5-year period for a total of 10% after the 5-year term. So you have been contributing to that over the past couple of years. You have your employee benefit accrued liability reserve, which is 1.8 million. And that does equal the compensated absence amount that you have recorded on your books, and it's not to exceed that amount. And then you also have workers' comp of a little over $1 million. I do want to mention there will be a change from this draft financial statement to the final report that will be reviewed this evening at the board meeting. This $200,000 of the repair reserve will now be moved up into this ERS reserve, and the repair reserve will no longer be there. So that is the one change that you'll see to the financial statements. Your assigned amounts are 2.4 million. You did assign $2 million to next year's budget, to the 21-22 budget. And then you had some encumbrances as well. And then your unassigned amount. The unassigned amount is almost 6.7 million. And I'm happy to report that that is 4% of the subsequent year budget. There is a compliance requirement that you are to not exceed 4%. So you are within that compliance requirement. Your school lunch fund has $142,000 in fund balance. You will notice a significant decrease from the previous year. You did transfer some money over to the capital fund for some capital improvements for equipment and maintenance for that program. And then this special reserve, the miscellaneous special revenue fund, has about $259,000 in it. That is a new fund as a result of GASB 84. And basically it took your trust and agency and your expendable and non-expendable trust funds, and you had to perform an analysis to see which of those funds the district had general oversight of and which of the funds did not, so that there was external parties or trust arrangements that had general oversight of those funds. So these are the funds that were moved into this new fund, into the miscellaneous special revenue fund. Your debt service, $171,000, a decrease in the previous year. You did transfer some money over to the general fund to pay down your debt. And then down below, your capital projects fund. That was a deficit of 41.8 million. Once again, you are banning for your capital projects, which is temporary financing. And that temporary financing is accounted for as a liability, and it won't be recognized as revenue until you permanently finance those projects with bond issuances. So that's why you're in the deficit position here. In total, again, total fund balance, a deficit position of 21.2 million, mainly the result of that capital projects fund. Pages 13 and 14 is a little bit more detail to the district-wide financial statements that we just looked at a moment ago in the MD&A. It's a more consolidated version. And then this next page starts your fund financial statements, page 15. So once again, this is a little bit more of what you're accustomed to seeing throughout the year. It's on a fund-by-fund basis. And the general fund is the main fund here. You did have assets of 34.2 million. The restricted cash of the 8.2 million does equal your reserves down below of the 8.2 million. These are your restricted or reserved funds that we looked at a moment ago in the net position analysis. And then your non-spendable was this prepaid items here of the 1.2 million. Your liabilities are pretty consistent with previous years. Again, accounts payable, your accrued liabilities, and then the amounts due to other governments, and then your TRS and ERS. And then your fund balance, these are the numbers that we just looked at a moment ago in that analysis as well. Again, the 6.7 million here is 4% of subsequent year budget. Your school lunch fund has $1.5 million in assets and 1.4 in liabilities. This new fund here, this miscellaneous special revenue fund, this again is the result of GASB 84, the implementation. And then I would like to point out here under the capital fund, this is the ban that I've been referring to. It's $59 million. That's approximately $13 to $14 million over the prior year bans. And again, the reason why your capital projects fund is in a deficit position. This next page details out your revenues and expenses on a fund by fund basis. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So your total revenues were $162 million in the general fund. Your expenses were almost $160 million. You did have additional transfers and redemptions of your ban of about $2.1 million. So your revenues over expenses for the general fund, you had an increase in your fund balance of $736,000. I do want to point out this transfer here, the 1.6 million, most of that went over into the capital fund and some into the special aid fund as well to supplement the programs there. Your school lunch fund had 1.5 million in revenues, 1.4 million in expenses. So your excess of revenues over expenditures was 139,000. This is where you can see you transferred 1.1 million over to the capital fund. So overall, you had a deficit from year to year of 943,000. Your special aid fund, your revenues equal the expenses, and it has a zero fund balance. And then this miscellaneous special revenue fund. Again, these are the funds that the district has general oversight of, and you do have control of the assets. These were moved over from the trust and agency fund in previous years. And then your capital fund, you had revenues of 500,000, the expenses, which again, most of it is in your construction in progress for your main capital projects, of about 5.6 million. And then your transfers in from other funds, giving you actually a deficit of your expenses over revenues of almost $2 million. The next page we're going to look at is the new fund, your custodial fund. So within this fund are funds that the district holds on to that you have control of the assets, but you may not have a general oversight of. And in total, you have about $400,000. This also created a new statement here for the additions and deductions for these funds. Typically, your trust and agency funds only had assets and liabilities. Your expendable and non-expendable trust funds did have additions and deductions, but this year for the custodial funds, everything is included and has additions and deductions as well. The next page starts the notes to the financial statements. Many of these are very consistent with previous years, so I am just going to hit a couple of the more significant notes or some of the changes. There were some changes throughout the report to include this new miscellaneous special revenue fund that we've mentioned as we've gone through this. And then on page 27, I do want to mention that there will be a change here as well. This repair reserve, as we mentioned a moment ago, that 200,000 will be transferred up to ERS. So you will no longer have that reserve, and it was new in the current year. So this paragraph here will be omitted prior to going final this evening at the board meeting. The top of page 28, this is a new disclosure here stating that you did implement GASB 84. And in the upcoming year, GASB 87 will be effective for leases. We have been talking to the district about detailing out any leases that you may have so that we can implement as needed and when applicable and material. So we'll be working with the district there. Page 31, this is your capital asset note, just detailing out your fixed assets and your capital projects. Once again, you had 118.4 million in total capital assets. And you'll see here, once again, most of those increases were in the construction in progress for your capital projects that you have ongoing. The next page details out your bands. Once again, you did have about $46 million in bands at the end of last year. That has increased due to this large band here for your capital projects up to the 59 million. And then note 10, this details out your long-term liabilities. You did have bonds at the end of the year of 14.4 million. You made payments of 4.7 million throughout the year. You have some unamortized bond premium and then your EPC contracts as well. Your EPC is at, the balance is approximately 4.1 million. Down below is your OPEB benefit liability. Once again, that is for the insurance that you provide to your retirees upon retirement, and it is actuarially calculated. That's 423 million. And we had mentioned before that that was approximately a $55 million increase from the end of last year. And there is a note that details out that increase that we'll look at in a moment. And then you also had your workers' comp, compensated absences. And then down here is your net pension liability. The net pension liability seems pretty consistent, but there was kind of a flip between the ERS and TRS. Once again, the TRS, your proportionate share was an asset at the end of last year, and it's now a liability. But that ERS proportionate share, actually that liability decreased significantly because the ERS pension plan was, it had a higher funding percentage at the end of the fiscal year this year. The next page I'd like to look at will detail out your change in your OPEB liability. So this is on page 41. You had 367 million, 368 million at the beginning of the year. There was some service costs and interest, and then your changes in assumptions is really where the increase from year to year is. It was about $37 million. That change in assumption, again, are the actuarial assumptions that they use. And then there were benefit payments throughout the year of 7.2 million. So that increase of 55 million added to the 367 million gives you that 423 million at the end of the year. The discount rate that they were using is 1.9%. That was a change from the previous year. Your previous year percentage was 2.4%. Keep in mind, as that rate decreases, the liability increases. So that is one of the reasons for this change in assumption up here being so high. The other note that I would like to point out is at the very end of the statements. Note 19 is a new note, and it just details out your cumulative effect of change in accounting principle due to the implementation of GASB 84. The next page is a required supplementary schedule. It details out your original and final budget versus actual for the general fund. You had budgeted 161.4 million in revenues, and you took in 162.5 million. So you did have $1,038,000 in revenue over the budget for the current year. And then your expenses were about 161.8, and you had budgeted 165 million. Included in there are the encumbrances, giving you your expenses were under budget by $2.8 million. That is approximately 1.7% of your budget. The next page is your OPEB schedule. We've gone over that detail. And then the next two schedules are the pension plan schedules. I am just going to spend a moment here. The top half of this is the ERS pension plan. The bottom is TRS. So your proportionate share of the ERS pension plan was 0.0397%. And that liability was only $39,000 in the current year. Last year, it was almost 11 million because they were funded at 86.39%. This year, they were funded at a 99.95%. I think we spoke about this a little bit last year. The ERS pension plan's year end is March. And if you think about where the market was in March of 2020, it explains why it was so underfunded at that point in time. And now it is 99.9% funded. The TRS, you are 0.39% of that plan. And you did have a liability this year of $11 million. Last year, it was an asset of 10 million. They were 102.2% funded at the end of last year and 97.8% funded at the end of this year. This next schedule, I do just like to point out, this is your calculation of the 4% undesignated fund balance. So once again, you are in compliance there. And then the next section of the report that we're going to look at starts the single audit section. This first report is the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance. I am happy to report that the results of our tests, the sentence down here, disclose no instances of non-compliance or other matters. And then the next report is your independent auditor's report on compliance for each major federal program. And there was an unmodified opinion there. There were no compliance issues noted. And that is here, in our opinion, you complied in all material respects. This next page is your schedule of federal expenditures. I'm going to try to get on one page for you. So in total, you had federal expenditures of 3.6 million. Again, you are required to have a single audit if you spend in excess of the $750,000. This year, we did test your school lunch program. In the prior year, we had tested your special ed program. I do want to point out that you did have some new federal money in the current year for the ESSER and the GEAR grant. This is some of that stimulus money that the district received, a total of $322,000 for the ESSER and $48,000 for the GEAR. This is just a summary of the audit results. So once again, an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. There were no compliance issues noted, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. This here notes that we tested your student nutrition cluster, your child nutrition cluster. And I do want to point out that once again, you are considered a low-risk auditee. Low-risk auditee, so there are some other factors involved, but two of the main factors is that you've had a single audit over the past 2 years, and no material weaknesses were noted. So no issues with the previous single audit. So once again, you are a low-risk auditee. So that gives you a quick overview of the financial statements. Does anybody have any questions on those? Okay, Nicole was going to just take a few moments to go over the required communications letter for the district, and then she'll get into the extra classroom report very quickly as well. Nicole, are you all set?
Yes, thank you. So as Tricia said, this is the required communication letter with those charged with governance. So this is the letter where we would directly communicate with you anything that we think is important for you to know to fulfill your financial oversight responsibilities. So I just want to draw your attention to a few items in this letter. The first one is in that significant audit findings section. As you can see, we do note there that we have implemented GASB 84, as Tricia pointed out when she reviewed the financials with you. Also, we list the significant estimates that are inherent in the financial statements. Those being your GASB 75 OPEB liability, which is calculated by the actuary, your compensated absences liability, the capital assets depreciable lives and depreciation expense, and then also your GASB 68 pension liabilities, as well as deferred inflows and outflows. Moving down, we do state here that there were no difficulties that we encountered with management during our audit. We're happy to report the audit went very smoothly. This was a big transition year for you, as with Kathleen joining the team, Donna joining the team. Everything went very smoothly and they were wonderful to work with, very cooperative. So we want to thank them for all their hard work during the audit. Also, we attach any journal entries that we posted during the audit, and they've all been posted to your books as well. If you were to look through those entries, you would see most of them are government-wide conversion entries that we post when we are converting your general ledger into the district-wide financial statements, as well as some entries in relation to implementing GASB 84. And if you continue down, again, we state that there were no disagreements with management. And then we also talk about the management representation letter, which will be signed and returned to us by the treasurer and by Kathy as well. Basically just where management takes responsibility for the financial statements. Also attached to this letter would typically be where we would state any findings or recommendations that we came across during the audit, which we are pleased to report that you had no findings this year as part of your audit. Is there any questions on this letter? Here's the journal entries that you talked about. Yeah. So if there's no questions, we can talk about extra classroom fund. So the first page I wanted to look at was on the independent auditor's report. Similar to the independent auditor's report on the financial statements. However, if you scroll down to the opinion section, you will see, as in prior years, we do qualify the opinion over the extra classroom activity funds. Just because of the internal controls over the cash at the point of collection by the students, we're unable to extend our audit procedures to that. So it is typically qualified, as well as on all of our other school districts as well. This is something that you typically would see. And then if we kind of skip ahead, I think the most important schedule in this report is on page 6 and 7, where we do list out all the activity for the year by club. And you can see that you started the year with a total of $299,000. Then they took in $58,000, spent $75,000, and then ended the year with roughly $283,000 in the extra classroom activity funds. And then we do issue the same required communication letter, where we do point out if there was anything significant that we want to draw to your attention. I'll just point out that there were no new accounting policies as far as extra classroom was concerned, and that we did have no difficulties again in performing the audit. Under the corrected and uncorrected misstatements, we just state that there were no misstatements noted during the audit. But there is one additional letter with extra classroom, which is our communication of significant deficiencies, which are attached on the 3rd page. And these are the same findings that we've had in prior years. There were no new findings in the current year. The first one being the cash receipts, which is the reason for the qualified opinion. Basically just stating that the controls over cash, like I said before, we're unable to audit the students collecting the money until it gets to the central treasurer's hands. Letter B is the inactive clubs. We did note several clubs that had no financial activity during the year. However, we do know that this year was a little strange as far as COVID, so you wouldn't have typical activity that you would normally have had there not been COVID. And then the last one being the student ledgers. So we did note, I think about 45 of the clubs that did not submit a student ledger in the current year. So we do recommend that the students are maintaining their own ledger in addition to the one that's maintained by the central treasurer. I know I went through that quickly for the sake of time, but if there's any questions, please let us know.
Tricia and Nicole, you did an excellent job with that. I thought it was very thorough. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Can I just have a question offhand, and Nikos, I see you have a question. Why don't I let you go first?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Ms. Lucas. While it seemed like a small number compared to the overall numbers we're talking about, you did mention it twice, so I just wanted to understand it better. Why is a repair reserve being transferred into a retirement reserve?
So initially, the board had approved to take the excess money from the end of the year. Typically, you would put it into the reserves. And in the current year, they had initially approved $200,000 to go into a repair reserve. So that money is no longer going to go into the repair reserve. There are some restrictions to funding a repair reserve that were not met. So instead of putting it into a repair reserve, it's going to go into the ERS reserve.
So this was money that was available for either, and it's just being moved from one to the other.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Were there any other questions?
It does. I'm sorry, I didn't see the order of questions. It looks like Robert, Mr. Kleinman, you have your hand up next. You want to ask your question, and then we'll go to Mr. Marcellus. Mark?
Yes. What percentage of your audits result in no comments in the management section, that Port Washington seems to have every year?
I can't give you an exact percentage. It does depend on year to year. Sometimes, depending on if there are new standards involved or a transition in staff could trigger some findings or recommendations. Port Washington, the district itself, in prior years, you did have some findings and recommendations. They have all been acted upon at this point in time, and then there were no new findings in the current year. I will say not many of our districts have this clean of an audit. So you are in the upper, percentile for districts not having any findings or recommendations.
Okay, as somebody who's been on this committee since the beginning, I just want to again commend the district on doing a fine job of properly reporting their accounting results and proper controls. It's very gratifying as a community member and taxpayer to see everything running as well as it should be.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellus, I think you have a question.
Yes, I do. And not so much for the auditor, but just a question that I would like to push back to the board as part of their oversight. And that is on these clubs and the deficiency in internal controls, which seems to be a recurring problem. I know it's not a lot of money, but speaking historically, we've been burned in the past where there's places that not a lot of money where the controls weren't good and it affected the district reputationally, among other things. And I would just wonder if there can be some sort of follow-up activity by the board to look into this. I mean, these clubs all have advisors as to why the cash is not being accounted for correctly.
Mark, if you don't mind, I'm just going to address a little bit of that. The inactive clubs, I do want to mention that it was kind of an odd year this year for clubs. A lot of clubs did not have activity in the current year that probably would have if it wasn't for the COVID environment that we were living in. And then,
I have no issue with the inactive clubs. I understand that completely. I'm talking about the fact that you're not getting proper financial reporting for the cash coming back.
I just took your note down, and actually my question is regarding that. I did hear Nicole say that in other schools that they are school districts that they are auditing, that it seems that at the point of collection by students, it is hard to audit that. My concern actually was in that there was student ledgers were not being kept and maintained. And I think that has also been a consistent problem that I have heard in reports to the board. And in fact, I thought there was a recommendation in prior audits to do some sort of electronic workflow to make it easier and more seamless. I don't know where we stand on it. I don't know, Ms. O'Hara, if you've seen where we stand on it or have anything else, or even to Nicole and Tricia, if you've seen in your audit systems that have been successful in regards to clubs for any of the deficiencies that we have.
So let me just address the student ledgers first. I agree. This is a very important control that there should be 2 ledgers for every club. One is a central treasurer's ledger, and then one is at the club level itself. They should be reconciled. We recommend monthly, so that any money that was deposited or spent by the club matches up with what is in the central treasurer's books as well. I do think maybe because of the year that we were in, we did see a higher number this year of clubs with no student ledgers. So yes, I think that should be a top priority, making sure that at the onset of the school year, I know it's the middle of October, but that every club understands, and the advisor as well understands that they should be keeping a ledger at their level and reconciling to the central treasurer. The cash receipts issue, that's a very difficult issue because it is nearly impossible for us to audit money that was raised on a Saturday morning at the local gas station for a car wash. You know, it could be $10 a car wash. Somebody comes through and gives you $20 because they would like to donate to the cause. The kids take $30 to go buy more soap and sponges or a pizza. So it is very difficult to reconcile the money taken in on these fundraisers that take in cash. We are seeing a lot of districts move to a more electronic method of collecting money. It would not work well for the car washes on Saturday mornings, but for instances of maybe tickets to the annual play or yearbooks, I know I pay for my children's yearbooks online now. There's no cash, no checks that are written. So for some of the larger fundraisers, online or electronic type payments, some schools are using My School Bucks or My Lunch Money, those types of platforms to assist in collecting the money. That would eliminate a lot of the risk. But again, you know, you buy candy bars, you're selling them for $1 a piece. You can't take online money for the $1 candy bars. There is going to be some cash involved in those transactions.
Mr. Mark, do you still have questions? I know your hand is still raised, and I know.
I'm sorry. No. That's it. I mean, the only thing I would add is these clubs all have advisors who are compensated for being part of the club. So hopefully, and as I said, this is something that goes back to the board administration, but hopefully there can be an effort to have the advisors work with the administration to come up ways to manage this.
No, definitely. Adam, I saw you had your hand raised, and did you take it down? Go ahead.
Yes. So I guess my question was for Mark. What was the reputational damage that you saw? Just because, you know, I see this and I'm not overly concerned with it, particularly if the amounts are relatively small. I mean, you shouldn't have a club that, you know, brings in $10,000 and has no ledger. But if you're off by, a couple of $100 at the end of the year, for those reasons, I'm less concerned. So I just want to hear what the reputational concern is about this.
I wouldn't want to discuss it in an open meeting, but feel free to give me a call. I'll email you my phone number.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from any of the committee members or anyone else that would like to provide any clarification? Okay, wonderful. So I thank all of you for the presentations. They were very thorough and complete. From it, we do have some action or recommendations to bring from the board, so to bring to the board. So I think that is a positive from our standpoint. I just want to go back to the rest of our agenda at this point, if everyone's in agreement. I'm going to share my screen. I'm sharing my screen. Sorry about that. So the rest of the agenda, we've had the reports on there. We have to go through our responsibilities, meeting dates, and some of our priorities. I think that we actually enumerated some of our priorities with the cybersecurity discussion. I know there were the questions also regarding the cash receipts that we can bring back to the board. Those are recommendations, but some of them are also priorities. And if we want to spend the time today, we can discuss more. I do know we've gone over time, so this might be something that we address at a later meeting. But we do need to then pick our meetings. So I'm going to move forward to that. Typically, this committee meets 2 to 4 times a year. Of course, you have the right and option to meet more frequently if needed. I'd like to set forward and recommend that we agree to meet at least twice a year, if everyone in the committee is in agreement. But with that said, I have slated out 4 dates with the idea that we will probably meet as many as 4 times a year. I just, again, picked out quarterly dates. Basically, I picked a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. because this time seemed to work well for everyone. I asked that the committee take a look at this, and can I ask for feedback regarding these meeting dates? Is everyone in agreement? And also about the idea that we agree to meet at least twice a year, but we may meet more frequently if needed. Are we all in agreement with that? Sorry, I have to make my screen bigger. Do I have any objections? Let's go with that. Everyone's quiet. Oh, yes, Mr. Kleinman, yes.
Yeah, January 18th, I could attend till about 9:45 and then I'd have to leave.
Okay. We can push it to the following Tuesday if you would like to do that, if that just makes it easier. I don't anticipate that these meetings, this will probably be our lengthiest of the meetings, and I don't anticipate that they will normally take more than an hour to an hour and a half of time. But if that works best and that's the only objection, I have no problem with moving it to the week after the 18th, which is the 25th, if everyone else is in agreement. Everyone in agreement?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll change that to, and we'll send these dates out also to the 25th at 9 a.m. For those of you that may not know it, we will be conducting these meetings via Zoom while we are still allowed to conduct them under the open meetings law via Zoom. The board will be reevaluating in January based on the governor's order and also as far as what's working. So if we do have to move to in-person meetings, or if we choose to move to in-person meetings and our dates don't work, we certainly have flexibility in working through those as well. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen here for a second. With that being said, and because I want to be respectful of time, I'm gonna move our priorities. Unless anyone has some priorities that they would like to share quickly that they've been thinking of, I would say that my recommendation is that I'm happy to compile priorities. I will reach out to the committee via email and maybe just get some priority suggestions if they think there are things that we would like to look at as a committee. And based on those recommendations, we can either put them on our January agenda, or again, if we receive information and feedback about the cybersecurity audit and anything else that we may have to discuss. If we have to meet before January, we can discuss it then. Mark?
I'm sorry, I had to check calendars. And, I'm not critical, so if we can't reschedule, it's fine, but I can't make the April 12th meeting.
Okay. So then I'm just making sure the 19th isn't a break. It is a break. We could move the April 12th to the April 5th.
No, the week before would not, it would have to be after, but
It would have
as
to
I
be
said,
after. So the only thing
Yeah.
I could say, so after would put us at the 26th, which I'm actually fine with if everyone else is fine. How is everyone else okay with the 26th? Okay, so then that's going to be April 26th. Okay, wonderful. So our dates for meeting are January 25th, April 26th, and June 7th. And again, if something arises, we can go ahead and make a change as well. And they're all via Zoom as of right now. Okay, excellent. And I'm looking on here, we have a few more matters to just close up, but I know for our auditors who have been on for a long time and spent their time with us, if you all, I think we are done with utilizing you for reference. So we're happy to have you exit and go on and enjoy your day. And we'll just finish up the last few things for our agenda items if you would like to, unless anyone has any further questions for the auditors.
I have a question. When this audit committee was first started, there was also, a push, and I'm not sure whether it was a legal requirement or best practices, that there was a rotation of auditors. I'm just wondering what is the current state of the art in terms of maintaining an auditor versus rotating an auditor?
So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that. And from what I've also looked at is that really you look at every 5 years, you would be potentially rotating your auditor, and this committee would be responsible for looking at it. I certainly don't have the history of this committee. Do you have any information on when the last time we looked at our auditors, or how long I don't even know how long we've had our auditors in place. Does anyone
So
have
I can speak on behalf of your external auditor.
Thank you.
We have been with you probably approximately 10 years. I would have to look exactly how many years. You are required to go out to bid and do an analysis of your auditing services every 5 years. And that has been conducted every 5 years as needed. You are not required to change auditors, but you do have to go out and look at other auditing firms and do an analysis of your services every 5 years.
Yeah, I agree with Tricia. You do have the requirement to, issue the RFPs, to solicit, for audit services, but you're not required to change them. If you're satisfied with our services, you can continue, with our, services in our firms.
Okay. Do we know?
Thank you.
So thank you. And do we know then, Tricia, you said 10 years. Do we know where we are in that? That was a rough 10 years, or is it an estimate? Do we know where we are in that cycle of auditing our auditors or our relationship with it?
I don't know about you, but the years for me go by very quickly lately. But I do believe that you went out for external auditing services 2 years ago, I believe.
Okay.
1920, I believe.
Okay.
And
Wonderful.
Julie, I'll look into that for both
Thank
the
you, Kathy.
external and the internal.
Thank you, Kathy.
And Kathy, if you can't find those and need something from us, just reach out and I can certainly assist you with that.
Okay, thank you.
And I wasn't raising the question looking for any changes. I think the district has been served very well by the 2 sets of auditors that we have.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Mark, I think you have a question. Oh, your hand is up still. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Yes, I think so far from what I've seen, you all have done a wonderful job, but I do agree, we as the audit committee do have to do our due diligence as well and kind of follow those processes. So that being said, we thank the auditors for attending with us. I'm going to let you all exit the meeting if you would like to, and then we can just finish with the remainder of the committee, the last few housekeeping items that we have. Thank you guys
Thank you so
again
much for having us.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take care.
Julie. I just have one other quick question. I'm going to bring bound statements to the meeting this evening.
Yes.
Typically, I bind approximately 15. Does that seem like that will be sufficient?
Yes, if everyone, yes, you will need no more than 15. Typically, we have 13 members present with the administration and the board, so 15 will be more than adequate.
Okay, and just to make sure, because we went into a more deeper dive in today's meeting, typically at the board meeting this evening, I'll do a 10-15 minute presentation and just give general type results such as opinions and the types of services that we provided.
I think that that is the direction we should continue to move in. Yes, I agree. Does
Okay.
everyone else in the committee agree with that recommendation? Yes, Adam DeBlock is going to have to sit through it twice otherwise. So. That'll be wonderful.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you later this evening.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you, everyone. All right, I'm going to let them depart. Okay, the last few items. So again, I appreciate you guys staying on for a few more minutes. I just will take a few more minutes of your time. We worked out the calendar. If you can tell, we're really trying to formalize more this procedure of the audit committee. I don't know how much you know or don't know, but at least last year, the reports weren't necessarily, there were really no reports from the audit committee to the board. So we just want to make a really concerted effort to make sure that the information from the audit committee is reviewed, is reported at the board meetings, and those recommendations are brought to the board because that is when the action is taken. So we're formalizing the framework. I know that everything was happening the way that it was supposed to. We're just formalizing the framework moving forward. And I hope you guys are in agreement with that as well. Part of that formalizing of the framework, again, is just establishing our priorities, which, as I said, in an effort of time, I will send out an email to everyone. If you want to think about things that we would want to look at as priorities for us to audit, and I can offer some suggestions after speaking with Kathleen. There were some ideas that we had generated as well, and just to give us some sort of action to take and look into in our roles as the audit committee. And then last but not least, I have as a committee 2 action items and recommendations to bring to the board. The first action item and recommendation is regarding that the audit committee is recommending that a NIST or NIST assessment / gap analysis and cybersecurity audit be conducted as a result of the findings from the internal audit. In addition to that, the ask is that the district will research whether or not it will continue with Naraki or if it will look at the other BOCES aidable firms in order to who will provide the services. Naraki is also going to provide us with a quote as far as what it will mean for them to continue on with that additional NIST assessment / gap analysis, as they were already going to recommend to go forward with the cybersecurity audit and what that pricing looks like. So that's the recommendation. The other recommendation, and I think, although I think it's appropriate for us to ask, I know only 2 committee members brought it up, but just in regarding to the clubs, it does seem that the club, either whether cash receipts or the ledgers, has been a consistent issue on our external audits. So we are asking that the board follow up on this item and set, checks and balances into place to be reported to the audit committee so we can see what changes have been implemented. And that will be one of our priorities also to watch over the coming year so that at least we'll have more information and close kind of that circle. With the understanding, of course, that the cash receipt control might be challenging, but that at least we're actively looking at it and it's not just forgotten. So if everyone on the committee is in agreement with those 2 recommendations to be brought to the board, I will do that this evening as our representation, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask at this time.
Just one thing, Julie. Many years ago, when we first formed this committee, we had an audit committee charter. I just speak for myself. I don't know if it's our obligation to update it, but we should probably at least review it annually. And I think, as being on this committee for several years, and the first meeting with you, I think you've done an excellent job so far as the chairman of this committee.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I I appreciate your charter and for framework and for process. I love a charter. I have not found a copy of the charter. Kathy, you haven't seen a copy either, have you? Do any of you as our seasoned members have a copy of this charter? That you
I do remember creating it with Jean Marie Posner many years ago, and the committee, we did go through with it, but I don't know whose responsibility is to keep it.
Right. So if the committee is in agreement then with that recommendation, what I can do is I know that the Office of the Comptroller has a suggested language for a charter, or we can utilize that language and then draft it on our own. I'm happy to put that together and then bring it as an item for us to discuss at our next meeting. And I know it's a little bit backwards because we should have done it this first meeting, but we had so much material to cover. I don't want to waste any more time. If everyone's in agreement and still feels that we can look at it at the next meeting and update it as needed. Yeah, great. Excellent. All right, I'm on board with all of this. I thank you all so much. And if there's no other questions, I appreciate all the time that you've taken with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again in January, if not sooner. And we'll reach out via email. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Enjoy.
Thanks, everyone.
You too.